Hey everyone, Nick here from Talking Cardboard, and today I'm going to be doing a list of my top 5 most anticipated crowdfunded board game projects that I have backed. And I've backed more than 5. I don't even want to know the exact number that I currently have backed. Definitely more than 5, but these are the 5 that I'm most excited about finally receiving in the mail. In some cases, I've been waiting several months, maybe over a year for some of these games, and in other cases, I've maybe only been waiting a few weeks. But nonetheless, these are games I've backed that I'm excited about getting. Does not by any means that I actually will end up enjoying these games. I've not really played any of them. In some cases, maybe I've dabbled with a tabletop simulator mod that's available for these games, but I can't even say in those cases that I've really played the game. So I can't say that a year or two from now, I'll still say these were great games by any means. This is just current moment in time, my most excited crowdfunded board games that I've backed. That said, hopefully some of you guys have backed these games too and are equally excited about receiving them. And in other cases, some cases, maybe you've never even heard of these games, in which case I encourage you to look up their crowdfunding pages to see if a late pledge is still available for the games, because in all cases, the projects definitely have passed the end date for the crowdfunding project. Let me know in the comments if this is the type of video in general that you want to see more of, like top 5 lists like this, because of course, at Talking Cardboard, we want to make content that's most interesting to you guys and most helpful too when making board game purchasing decisions. I do want to start with an honorable mention that I actually did not officially back yet, but I'm still anticipating this project and plan to back soon. So without further ado, let's get to the honorable mention before we dive into the actual top 5. So honorable mention for my list of most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game projects goes to Total War Rome, the board game. And why is this just honorable mention? Well, it's because I actually haven't even backed this project yet. More on that later. But why is it still even in consideration for most highly anticipated? Well, that's because of the IP that inspired this board game, which was the Total War franchise. And for those of you unaware, with the Total War franchise, let me introduce to you Shogun Total War, the original PC title for the Total War franchise that was released over 20 years ago. This was the first PC game that I remember playing that finally allowed me to have massive battles on the screen at once, or with tons of units on the screen at once. So often, I loved RTS games, but in so many RTS games, you only have 10, 20, 30 guys fighting each other in battles, and I was like, this isn't how history was resolved. Like, these conflicts had hundreds of guys on the field at once, and Total War allowed you to experience that, and I love Total War for that. Only a few years after Shogun Total War was released, Rome Total War was announced, and that's the only PC/video game I ever pre-ordered because I was so, first of all, enamored by Shogun Total War that I knew Rome Total War was going to be a lot of fun, and it was. And to this day, Rome Total War is probably my most favorite PC game I've ever played. They've had tons of other Total War games released since, but nonetheless, this is just a great franchise in my opinion because it's the franchise that does these large-scale battles the best. And of course, there's a strategic map element to the PC game as well, but the fun is definitely having these huge battles. Now, you better believe when I heard there was going to be a Rome Total War board game that I was immediately going to look into it, and I almost instantly backed it. And again, I'll get to why I didn't back it yet in a second, but let's talk about a few of the other characteristics that I appreciated about the board game. And first, some high-level high-level details. This was a game published by PSC Games, which I think is most known for miniatures, but they have published board games as well. 3,700 backers, over 500,000 pounds raised. So relatively large board game project, but largely probably due to the IP that this game was based around, designed by Simon Hall. So one thing that I was very appreciative was their inclusion of the various factions in the board game. In the core box, you get Rome with 18 unit types, Barbarians with 14 unit types, Carthage with 18 unit types, Greece with 18 unit types. So these factions seem very asymmetrical. They each have unique faction boards. So happy about that. You might be thinking, well, only 4 factions, that's nothing. Well, for only $38 more, you do get this. You could get this faction booster expansion, which gives you 8 more factions. And so for $38, I think that's well worth the money. And I think they should have just added $38 to the core box price and just included these 8 factions, because I think people might get frustrated that you have to pay $38 more to get 8 more factions. But to me, again, that's well worth the money. For another $63, you then can get another 5 factions and another board with this Alexander expansion. So you can almost match the variability you have in the PC game with the expansions being offered. Also, important to note, as it says here, this allows 1 to 5 players. Yes, this game does have a solitaire rule set, which is fantastic. As you guys probably know, I'm always all for games with solitaire play modes. So great to see that the Total War games allowing you to play the game single player, which is how most people played the original title of Rome Total War. Yeah, I think Rome Total War did offer multiplayer battles, but it may be multiplayer strategic campaigns, but you know, people are playing that game solitaire or single player. So glad that you could do that in the board game as well. Combat resolution, though, is what is scaring me a little bit. In the PC game, that's what drove you to wanting to play that game, these large-scale battles. The core box, in fact, of the board game only comes with the high-level combat resolution system, which the board game themselves say, like, this is if you click the auto-resolve button in the PC game. Great. I'm glad that they do offer a more streamlined combat resolution system in the board game to kind of streamline gameplay for battles that you don't really want to fight out. Totally on board with that. If you want a more in-depth battle resolution system, though, you do have to get the Battle Play expansion. Now, it's annoying you have to pay for that extra, and it's not part of the core box, but it's only $17. Okay, so money-wise, not a huge issue. But when I look at it, it looks very one-dimensional. It's only like a 2x1 grid. 2 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2x7 grid. And you do get terrain tiles too to, vary the battles up a little bit, but I just don't think you're going to get that grandiose experience you did in the PC game with this Battle Play expansion system. I was hoping for, the board game or the publishers do say, well, if you want, PSC offers this Morit et Gloriam tabletop miniatures war game that you could incorporate into your Rome Total War board game experience. But this is a miniatures game. I'm not going to go out and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on unpainted minis. So kind of unrealistic. My personal idea, and others have expressed this idea as well, of leveraging the Onus Triana system. And this game I also have already done a video for on the Talking Cardboard YouTube channel, so please check that video out if this game looks interesting. But this gives you all the units in the box, much more streamlined than that miniature system. In fact, I think it could be streamlined further if used in collaboration with Rome Total War, the board game. But this would give me the kind of experience I was looking for in resolving the conflicts that you would have in the board game. But the other small thing that I'm not necessarily as worried about, but a little disappointed about, is the fact that I don't think you're going to have the same depth of infrastructure you have in the PC game. There's only barracks, markets, and defensive walls that you can build for your territories. I think there's a couple other buildings they're going to add by the time this game launches. But, in the PC game, there's dozens of buildings and asymmetric buildings too, I think, for the different from depending on what factions you're playing. And that's not really going to be part of the PC game. Again, for purposes of streamlining the board game, I understand the design decision around that, but I just wish I would have seen a little more building opportunities in the board game. Nonetheless, that's why it's just honorable mention, and why I've yet to back it, although I very likely will. And with that said, let's actually start talking about games in the actual top 5 list. So my number 5 most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game project that I've backed goes to Snapship Tactics. And many of you may be aware that this is a game based on a toy line called Snapships. I was not aware of that toy line, but have become aware after backing this project. But yes, this is indeed a board game based around the Snapship toy line. And this game was funded only a few weeks ago. Part of the reason why it's only number 5 on my list, because I haven't been able to anticipate it for very long yet. So maybe over time it will actually increase on my list. In terms of other details about this project, 1,500 backers total, pledging almost $300,000. The publisher of this game is called Lindvander Studios, and they look like they've published a few other Kickstarter projects, but also it's in conjunction then with the Snapship toy company, since of course they have that branding or that IP. And let's get into the things I like about this right away. The miniatures. Let's talk. I don't see how anyone can not immediately be interested in the toy factor of this game. Like, this is, I wish I had this when I was a kid myself, you know, being able to play like a legitimate game using these really awesome miniatures. Enough cannot be said about that aspect of this game. And the thing too that I've always wished was more of a thing for miniatures game, which I understand the logistics of why you don't see this in many miniatures game, but is just having your miniatures you're playing with actually look like what they're equipped with. Because oftentimes you play miniatures games and the miniature figure itself doesn't change, you know, depending on what you have it equipped with. But in this game, that is part of the fun, is you're building out your ship to look exactly like what it's equipped with. So, okay, component from a component standpoint, obviously very excited about this game. Gameplay wise, what immediately caught my attention is it's a miniatures game with a co-op and solitaire rule set. And you might be thinking, is it a good co-op solitaire rule set? And from my perspective, from what I've read, yes, it definitely is. Check out the rule book that's available on the Kickstarter page to read more about how the AI system works. Also, there's a video from One Stop Co-op Shop that does a whole playthrough with the Solo system. So I find it that the Solo system's very innovative and streamlined at the same time. Basically, you just draw a card. There's an AI deck of cards. So you use just like 5 or 6 cards for every different enemy ship, and you draw a card and you just kind of do what the card says. You follow a very clear-cut process flow chart that's on the AI card. The fact that there's multiple AI cards for each ship means there's variability in what those enemy ships are going to be doing on their turn, so you don't know exactly what they're going to do. And then it means, of course, that every enemy ship that you fight against is going to be a little different in how they play. So a lot to be said about that co-op system, or solo/co-op system. So that's really cool. And the things that maybe... Oh, and sorry, the other thing that just looked really awesome was just how combat is resolved in this game. I thought the combat seems a lot of fun, and how you attack and damage other ships. Definitely, I won't go into detail about how the combat system works, but read more about the combat system yourselves, because I just found that it makes a lot of sense in how the mechanics operate to resolve the combat in this game. In terms of things that I'm a little concerned about, and you may be thinking this already, these miniatures are pretty big, and sooner or later you're going to have these miniatures close together on the board, and they're going to be bumping into each other. My hope is that it's not that big of a deal. The game does come with variable heights of the bases for the miniatures, so you can kind of mitigate them from bumping into each other to some degree. But at the end of the day, these things, you know, extend. The models themselves obviously extend over the edge of their base and are going to eventually be bumping into each other. So I just hope it's not as big of an issue as I imagine it could potentially be. The other concern that I have is the replayability of the game. You know, the basic game is just death matches. You're just you put your ship together, or number of ships together, and then the enemy does, the other player does the same, and then you just duke it out. I've noticed that as the campaign has gone on, they've introduced added scenarios to the game, like this asteroid scramble scenario, and that's what I'm hoping they do more of, is just have scenarios and maybe even campaigns for this game that make you want to play multiple missions back to back, and each of these missions have kind of a different flavor to them, so it's not just a simple death match, to make me want to continue to play this game and not just get my replayability purely from designing different types of ships. I might want to just have one design and play that design multiple times and through different types of scenarios. And it looks like they definitely are trying to get scenarios put out there, so I just hope they continue that moving forward. One last thing I want to touch on was my pledge level. I am backing at the $199 Squadron pledge. That comes with a total of 6 different ships, I believe. So that should be enough replayability for the start. And obviously, in the future, if I want to add more ships, I can. and hopefully they continue to release more ship expansions and maybe like a campaign or scenario expansion or map pack or something like that. That'd be really cool. I do think at the $99 level, you're not going to get enough to really get a lot of enjoyment out of this game, unfortunately. I like that they at least give you the AI cards so you don't have to spend extra additional money for the co-op / solo play ability, but with just 2 ships, I don't think you're going to get enough. It's just enough content to play this game over again. With that all said, keep in mind, these miniatures are top-notch. Like, even though this is not a little amount of money, like $200 for a Kickstarter project, isn't cheap by any means. In terms of the value, I really think you get a lot of bang for your buck here, because these are good quality miniatures. They're big, they're painted. I don't think I can overstate, the what you're getting for the amount of money you're paying. So, and that's my opinion. But anyway, with that said, those were the reasons why Snapship Tactics is my number 5 most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game project. So my number 4 most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game project that I have backed is Company of Heroes, the board game 2nd edition. Now, this is a little bit of a cheat because I actually already backed the Company of Heroes board game 1st edition and received it in the mail and actually played it once. I did a solo playthrough that's actually posted on our Talking Cardboard YouTube channel if you want to watch that. But after playing it, I found out that there was going to be a 2nd edition, and instead of dealing with the whole rigmarole of getting an upgrade pack so I could upgrade my 1st edition to the 2nd edition, I decided I'd just sell the 1st edition at this board game flea market and start from scratch as a new backer for the 2nd edition. And that's why I'm including this game on my list of anticipated projects. So with that said, hopefully many of you are already aware with the Company of Heroes IP. It's a PC game that's been around now for many years. It's a World War II themed RTS game, one that I actually never really played, but it's definitely a type of game I wouldn't mind playing, since I like RTS games and World War II theme. But when I found out that there was going to be a board game based around this PC game, I immediately caught my attention and led to me essentially backing it. This game was published by Bad Crow Games. 5,500 total backers, pledging over $1.2 million. So definitely a fairly big-sized Kickstarter project. What else stood out to me about this game and what made me back it was the quality of the miniatures that come with this game. They're just top-notch, like chef's kiss. You can't really do much better than the miniature quality in this game. They feel great in your hands. They're good size. They look great on the table. So great job there. In addition then to the miniatures, you have these really nice large boards. Like, it's kind of hard to pick up here in these pictures, but the hexes on these boards are just nice and big and beefy, and I love that because I'm tired of these tactical games where all your units just feel so crammed together. You feel like your units are gonna die from asphyxiation because they can't get any oxygen, but that's not an issue on this game. And then you have, you do have to pay extra. You pay for an extra expansion to get this content, but there are these great 3D terrain elements too that really make the board come to life. And it's nice that they have those available for the game. Besides just the aesthetics of this game, what also really appealed to me was the fact that there is a solo/co-op mode for the game as well. Now, this did exist for the 1st edition, and I got it for the 1st edition. I just mentioned I did a playthrough video using that system on the Talking Cardboard, but they decided to revamp the solo system completely. And overall, it sounds like it's all for the better. One major change they made is that now you can play against all factions. In the 1st edition, you could only play against the Germans. Now you can play against any of the factions. So that seems like a thing that would have been obvious in the 1st edition, but it wasn't included. You could only do the Germans. Now you can do play against any faction. So that's great. Also, you can actually play with the miniatures against the AI. In the 1st edition, the AI units were always just these little round tokens that would move around the board. And now the enemy, once you flip them from their hidden to revealed side, you can remove their square tokens now, but you can remove their square token and replace it with the actual miniatures that represent that unit. Again, something you would have thought would actually have been common sense to use in the original version. Nonetheless, that's been fixed. Now you can actually play against the actual miniatures because, of course, you want to see these miniatures out on the table since they look so great. And also, I just love the combat system. I'm not going to go into detail of how the combat works in this video for the sake of time, but it's very streamlined. It goes super fast, easy to kind of understand. Things just make sense. It's kind of rock, paper, scissors-y, but not in a bad way, in a way that is functional and makes sense. And if you want to see that in action, actually check out another video I did recently on Talking Cardboard, which was a playthrough video with the designer of the board game using the Tabletop Simulator mod. And we played a few rounds of a game, A Company of Heroes, using the co-op rules. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about how the game plays. What am I concerned about? Well, there's actually not a lot from a rule or mechanic or aesthetic standpoint that I'm worried about with this game. The thing that I'm worried about is just the lack of a dedicated solitaire campaign and lack of scenarios with unique objectives. Out of the box, this game does come with a mission booklet which claims to have 40 different mission setups, but they're not missions in the traditional sense by any means. Like the objectives from my standpoint, unless I'm wrong, maybe I'm going to be proven wrong here, but from my knowledge, every mission has the exact same objective. You're just trying to get more victory points than the opponent. That's it. It's not about blowing up certain things, capturing certain objectives, holding out a certain number of rounds. It's always the very same. You just want more victory points than the opponent. And when you're playing in any solo or co-op game, it's always the same. You just want to have more victory points or victory points than the AI opponent. So I think there's so much opportunity to add in unique, specific objectives into this game. I really hope that's something that they will incorporate in the future. I haven't heard any kind of hints that's going to happen. So this is kind of my call to action for anyone watching this and agreeing with me. Like, hey, message Bad Crow Games, say that you'd love if Company of Heroes adds more missions and campaigns, because that could send this game to just my #1 game of all time. I've been very vocal about it already in the Discord channels for this game and forums online. So I feel like I'm a broken record and don't even like saying this anymore about the game since I say it so much, but I just feel like there's so much missed opportunity by not having unique scenarios and a unique campaign for this game, especially since it's based on a PC game that has a single player campaign. So again, something that would be kind of common sense that would exist for this game, but as of now does not. With that said, I want to point out that I did go with as shown here, the $219 4-player bundle. There's a lot of different options available, backer options. You could just go with a more simple 2-player bundle, which is just $100. And I think you get a decent amount in that $100 pledge, but you're only getting then 2 factions. So you kind of feel like you're missing out if you don't get the $219 bundle, which gives you then all 4 factions. I'll probably add on other additional expansions like those terrain packs too. So you could say a downside of this game is the cost, because it escalates very quickly. You can easily be spending $300 to $400, if not more, to get all this cool looking stuff. But I also can't say it's not within. I think the what you're getting for your money is reasonable. It's just that's just the reality. You're getting high quality miniatures, nice components. It's going to cost money. That's just the reality of how money and business works. So I can accept that. I'm not going to say it's something that disappoints me about this game, but definitely other people may be a little frustrated by how expensive this game can be. But with that said, plenty of reasons for why this deserves the number 4 spot on my list of highly anticipated crowdfunded board game projects that I've backed. So my number 3 is Purple Haze by Phalanx Games. This game had nearly 2,700 backers, raised over 200,000 euros, and was funded in January of 2022. And this game then isn't as big of a project as some of the other games we've talked about so far in this video, but still a very successful project nonetheless. And this is a Vietnam-themed war game. What one thing that immediately caught my attention and why I was interested in backing it is the fact that it is a cooperative board game, which means you can play with other people, or of course you can play solitaire. So that's always a plus for me for any game. But then the other main drawing factor of this game was that it blended RPG elements with a historical war game. So far in my lifetime, when I've seen any kind of board game that has RPG elements, it's always either a sci-fi theme or a fantasy theme. And maybe some of you are saying, well, what about like this War of Mine? That's a war. Sure, if you want to, that you could argue that's an RPG game with a historical war type element to it, but really, when I think of a war game, I think of tactical fighting and a lot of mechanics around the weapons and combat, which this War of Mine to me doesn't have. So, to my knowledge, there isn't really a game like this at all. And for Purple Haze to be the first of its kind, I think is what pulled me in. I was like, wow, I don't know of a game that does what Purple Haze is doing. And so, in addition to that part of just that general aspect of this game, the fact it is published by Phalanx Games is very reassuring for me. I think Phalanx is a highly reputable board game publisher. If you've never played the game U-Boot, check that out, because that's a game published by Phalanx, which simulates managing a sub during World War II. Very unique, innovative system in that game. So other than those points, the other thing, the game itself, of course, appeals to me too when I learn more about it. So there's just a lot of theme dripping out of this game. First of all, you can see in these pictures, the maps are very, as far as I'm aware, historically accurate topographical maps of the area of Vietnam. So that just visually, it brings you into the game. It immerses you in that in the theme. But then the depending where you are, in the topographical map, will impact aspects of the game itself because of the terrain you're in. So I think that really brings you into the theme, like, oh, I'm in the middle of the jungle, and that that impacts then the types of events and enemies you're fighting. So I think that's cool that this game is taking the actual topographical location of where you are in Vietnam and actually making that meaningful to how the game plays. That is what theme to me is all about. Then when you get to combat, that also is a big part of why I wanted to back this game, because the combat system to me is extremely innovative. When you're about to fight an enemy, you draw an enemy card, and then you get this kind of picture that's the POV of your squad, essentially, of where the enemies are located. And and the enemies in this case are dice, and a single triangle enemy is close range. 2 triangles means they're kind of medium range, and a 3 triangle enemy would be farther back. So you kind of get this, you're immersed in that combat situation. You feel like you're there with your troops looking out at the bad guys that they're trying to take down. And it's reminiscent of games like Time Stories, where you're drawing these picture cards to kind of get a visual idea of what room you're in. But this takes that to the next level. Like, there's all this information on these combat cards too, and how you interact with the cards. You're fighting, you're picking what units you want to shoot at. They are shooting back at you. So the whole combat system in general is extremely innovative. Definitely watch other videos about this game if you want to learn more about how combat works, because not trying to explain all that right now. And there's a lot of aspects I haven't even touched on about this game that I think are really unique, including just the story element and events in this game that you'll be experiencing. In terms of concerns, the one thing that kind of just bothered me is just the fact that when you draw these enemy cards, they seem a little lacking of detail on the enemies themselves. Like, you have all this detail for your own units, but for the enemy right now, they're just triangles and dice, and there's no flavor to that. Like, I kind of was hoping that they would explain what kind of weapon systems they have and what type of enemy they are, if they're inexperienced, they're not experienced, that sort of thing. So I hope they add more to these enemy cards as the game continues on development. But the other only caution that I have with this game is replayability value. Now, from my understanding, you definitely can replay the mission in the core, or missions in the core box, multiple times, because you're making decisions in these missions that have long-lasting impact on how the mission plays out. So, from my understanding, you could play the same mission multiple times and get different outcomes depending on the choices you're making with the events that you're drawing and going through. But already they do have then 4 additional mission pack expansions, which is great to see. And I think that is what's going to drive the replayability value of this game, is getting additional missions, which is totally fine. Like when you're with any story-driven game, you're going to have to continue to acquire new missions and scenarios to want to continue playing the game, because that's just the nature of a story-driven game. So, or like any LCG that existed, that's what brings you wanting to play that LCG over again, is, oh, there's a new LCG pack, or like Time Stories. I keep bringing that game up. To replay Time Stories, you're getting another module to add and try the new module. And so I don't have a problem that that's how you want to replay this game. I just hope then they continue supporting that in the future. One other thing in terms of pledge, I did the base pledge, which was only 65 euros, which any pledge for a board game these days that's under $100, it seems like a steal. So I was definitely happy with the price of this game for what you get. You're not getting tons of cool looking miniatures, but it seems like a very well designed game. With that said, tons of reasons why Purple Haze is my number 3 most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game project that I have backed. All right, my number 2 most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game project that I have backed is Aridia: The Paths We Dare Tread. This game was fully funded in September of 2021. It had 10,577 backers pledge over $1.3 million. So this was a very large and successful Kickstarter project. And one of the aspects of this game that made me immediately want to back it was the fact it was published by Far Off Games, which is the company that published the game Xia: Legends of the Drift System. And if you're not familiar with Xia, please check that game out. It's an incredibly innovative space-themed sandbox game where you're in control of a spaceship, moving it all around space, trying to take out bad guys or take out good guys and steal their loot or steal their cargo or just transport cargo. There's so many different things you can do in that game, being it is a sandbox game. But one of the things that stood out about Xia was its fantastic component quality, including pre-painted miniatures. And thankfully, it looks like Aridia will not disappoint and have fantastic component quality as well, including the pre-painted miniatures. Now, in addition to that, this is a fully cooperative game for 1 to 4 players. So that's a big selling point for me. And what else is exciting about this game? I'm just kind of going to scroll through the Kickstarter page because it does actually a very good job of laying out all the great aspects that this game offers. First, character creation looks really awesome. The map system in this game is extremely interesting and compelling to me. You have first this kind of higher level open world map, and then as you move across different areas in the open world, you can zoom down into a specific location. And once you're down into that specific location, you're able to do a bunch of different things, such as just talk to characters, experience events, find points of interest. Of course, there's fighting monsters, and then obviously there's gathering loot. This game offers a pretty robust leveling up system for your characters. And as I mentioned, there's pre-painted miniatures, but not just like the guys that you're controlling. The bad guys are pre-painted as well, which is very nice. The Kickstarter page calls out easy setup, and I'm sure we all agree that one of the biggest roadblocks for any big box dungeon crawler game is the setup. So if Aridia is doing something innovative when it comes to easy setup, that is a big plus in my mind. And then here you just see kind of everything at once that this game offers, and it just looks great on the table. When it comes to the character creation side of things, as I already, it looks like there's a bunch of different classes of characters that you can play. And from a replayability standpoint, that's always a huge plus because already this game looks like just to play through it once would be lots and lots of hours of gameplay. But then once you've played through the game, if even that's possible in this game, I'm not exactly sure if you can play through it or if it's more sandboxy, but either way, you're going to want to try different character types, and they look very asymmetric. So that's great to see that they've really fleshed out very distinctive looking character classes. Moving on to the open world map system, I talked already about that. But the variety and flavor of the locations looks absolutely fantastic. You can see the artwork is extremely different from location to location. So it looks like you really do have a huge world to explore. And then it goes into detail of what you can do when you are exploring a location and kind of how you reveal more and more tiles of the location as you are exploring it, until you finally might find yourself in a combat situation. And combat in this game is absolutely chef's kiss. Like, I always appreciate combat systems that get into the nitty-gritty details of what combat actually is, and that's what Iridia does. Instead of just rolling dice and hoping you get a to hit value, you're rolling dice, which is fine to me. I like rolling dice, but that die number then corresponds to how effective your weapon attack was, and your weapon has like a specific attack directionality. So in the case of this example, the sword can just attack horizontally, and the higher number you roll, the more damage you're able to do horizontally. And then the enemies themselves have hit point locations, which kind of reminds me of the enemies you come across in the Sleeping Gods game, if you've ever played that, from Ryan Lockett. But that times 10. Like, it's not just you're trying to knock off certain locations. Like, your weapon corresponds to what you can actually do to the monster. So and I probably like oversimplifying the combat system in this game, but so definitely check out the Kickstarter page or watch more videos to learn more about that. And also, when the enemies attack you, I really appreciate what the combat system incorporates in that there's the enemies roll a die with these various shapes, kind of Tetris looking shapes on them, and ultimately the die you roll for the enemy corresponds to a specific location on your body that the enemy has attacked. And then, depending on if you have armor there or not, will be the determining factor of how much damage you actually take from the enemy attack. So the monster turns also seem relatively straightforward and easy to go through, and that's great. And then there's character progression. So there's a skill tree. You're gaining levels and that just upgrade various attributes various attributes. And then you have a skill tree that you're unlocking as you also are gaining experience. So there is just tons and tons and tons of content in this game. I could probably spend another 30 minutes going over everything Iridia has to offer. In terms of things I'm concerned about, there's really nothing. I mean, the only thing that comes to mind is I hope the rulebook for this game is good, because it seems like there is a lot of stuff in this game. But I thought the Xayah rulebook was fairly well written. I don't think it was as complex as Iridia is going to be, but nonetheless, I felt pretty happy with the Xayah rulebook. So I have, I'm optimistic about the rulebook for Iridia, but really the game at face value looks absolutely fantastic. I mean, this is a game I think anyone should be checking out. So with that said, for so many reasons, my number 2 most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game project that I've backed is Iridia, The Paths We Dare Tread. So my number 1 most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game project is Fighters of the Pacific. This game was published by Capsicum Games and was fully funded in April of 2021. It had 1,478 backers, pledging over 128,000 euros. And part of the reason why it is my number 1 game is the fact that I've been waiting for it since April of 2021, and I probably will be waiting for it to hit my doorstep for another few months, but that's okay. I can be patient. Another big selling point for me for this game and why it's number 1 on my list is its theme. I've always been enamored by the Pacific theater of World War II, and this is a tactical fighting Pacific theater World War II game where one side is the U.S. forces and the other side is Japanese forces, and it's focusing on air-to-air combat, which is surprising, probably based on the title of the game, although naval units are also incorporated in the game as well. Another selling point for me was the fact this is going to have a solo mode offered, so that's always a plus for any game for me. And I also really appreciate the artwork in this game. I've always been interested in getting into the Wings of Glory miniatures war game, which is by Ares Game. Is kind of like a World War II / World War I version of X-Wing the miniatures game, if you're not familiar with Wings of Glory. But I never got into it because I didn't want to have to invest in another, miniature war game franchise. But with Pacific Fighters of the Pacific, I feel this game will scratch that itch. And it comes with tons of units in the core box. You don't have to worry about painting anything. And it's true that the units in this game are 2D tokens, but that's totally fine with me because it cuts down costs when you're playing with 2D tokens. And also it's just much more easier to transport. Let's be honest, moving a bunch of miniatures around is a chore in itself. So really appreciate all the unit variety in this game. Another big selling point for me was the streamlined nature of the rule set. So they have the sample rules on the Kickstarter page if you're interested, and you can see it's only an 8-page document. So very cut and dry rule set. And I really appreciate the initiative rules for this game. Basically incentivizes keeping your aircraft together in an aircraft group, which is highly thematic in my opinion, because my understanding is the squadrons in World War II in air combat did kind of stick together, and that's what you're encouraged to do then in this game. The combat is actually is deterministic, which might turn off some people, but to me then it creates a more strategic game. You're not relying on luck really at all in this game. In fact, there's almost no luck factor as far as I can tell in this game, so that's really cool. And by having such a simple rule set, it really increases the accessibility of this game and hopefully will make it easier for me to find opponents. But since it has that solo mode, I also can play by myself if I want to. And also, I appreciate the variety of scenarios offered in this game. So the core box comes with 10 scenarios, and then the expansions have scenarios as well. In terms of what concerns me about the game, number one, it is that solo mode. Unfortunately, there's really been no details provided yet on what that solo mode is going to look like. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it's good, but we'll see. And also, I do think there's even more opportunity for a larger variety of scenario types. At least from my perspective, they're not really promoting any kind of land invasion type scenarios. Maybe those are included, but I'm just looking at the tokens that come with the game, and nothing really speaks to me that there would be land invasion type scenarios. So if there's not, my hope is then in future expansions they would introduce that to the game. And then also naval combat. I don't think as of now there's ship to ship combats in this game. It's just plane to ship or plane to plane combat. And again, maybe that is included in the game, but if not, hopefully in an expansion, you can actually have your ships fight each other too. And finally, I don't know if the ships are asymmetric at all. Definitely the planes are. All the planes seem to have their own unit cards that are completely different. They have different fire arcs and different speeds and different abilities in terms of what weapons they can equip. But the ships kind of seem generic and just, they look different on their tokens, but they behave all the same as far as I can tell. I hope that's not the case. If it is, that would be a little disappointing since, I'd like to see a variability in how these naval units are behaving in the game. But with that said, overall, this game just looks really cool to me, and that is simply why I have it as number one on my list of highly anticipated crowdfunded board game projects that I've backed. And real quick, I backed this game at the €80 pledge level, which is called their campaign pledge, which includes the core box as well as the 2 expansions, that Battle of Midway expansion and a Battle of the Coral Sea expansion, which I think, considering all this content you're getting, that's good value. The just base pledge is called the Battle Pledge, and then that's only €45, and I also think that's good value. I do think you get a decent amount in that core box too. So I do think this game, for what you're paying, you're getting a lot of content too, which also helps me justify putting this on number one on my list. So that's number one. All right, well, there you have it, my 5 most highly anticipated crowdfunded board game projects that I've backed. And this list is obviously going to change over time as I back more games and also as these games finally arrive in the mail. So let me know in the comments if you would like to see a video like this again in 6 months to see how my list has changed. Also, let me know if you want to see video content of any of these games once I finally receive them in the mail and have the chance to play them. Finally, also let me know in the comments if there's any crowdfunded board game projects that you've backed that you're highly anticipating. I definitely have backed other games that did not make this list that probably were close to making this list. So I love to hear what other games people have backed, because it's possible I've backed those games as well. And with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was interesting. And with that said, I'm Nick from Talking Cardboard. Hope to see you guys again soon.